The content of this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the guidance of your healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your mental or physical health. The views expressed are those of the host and guests and do not replace personalized care from a licensed professional.
Welcome to Mindful Moments with Pedro Morante, a space where a nurse practitioner and educator shares real talk on mental wellness, mindfulness, and navigating life in and out of healthcare. Let's take a moment to breathe, reflect, and grow together.
Welcome to the show. Today's episode explores one of the most important and complex topics of our time, mental health, and how artificial intelligence could help shape its future. Mental health affects how we think, feel, connect, and live, and yet for decades, it's been one of the hardest areas of medicine to diagnose, treat, and scale with consistency. While other fields like cancer and cardiology have seen major technological breakthroughs, mental health has often lagged behind. Our guest today is Erwin Estigarribia, a leader working at the intersection of healthcare, science, and technology. Erwin has spent years applying advanced technologies to serious medical conditions, and now he's turning his focus to the brain, arguably the most complex system we know. In this conversation, we'll break down what AI really means for everyday people, how it could help diagnose and help clinicians understand their patients more, and why technology, when done right, can actually strengthen, not replace, human connection in mental health care. Whether you work in healthcare or are simply curious about where mental health is headed, this episode is for you. Good morning, Sir Erwin from Headlamp Health. Thank you so
Good.
much.
Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to discussing this very, very important topic.
Thank you so much. And for listeners who don't work in healthcare or tech, how do you usually explain what you do and why it matters?
No, it's a great question because I'm always interacting with folks outside of healthcare, outside of tech, mainly because mental health and neuroscience is so broad and it affects so many people. And so, what I typically share with them is that I work in bringing precision, so a greater degree of certainty when it comes to either diagnosis or treatment in mental health. And in the past, when I've worked in other fields, there has been more explanations or a larger degree of use cases and examples that I have to use. But what I have found in this space is that because so many people, either themselves or somebody that's very close to them, have experienced or is experiencing a mental health condition, they get it very quickly, which is, it's a very frustrating space, and we just need to be able to do a lot better than the current status.
Thank you for that. So, what problem are you most focused on solving right now for this platform?
Yeah, with our platform, the biggest problem that we're trying to achieve is really be able to not only connect patients and clinicians and keep them connected through timely data that enables for better care, more efficacious care, but also helping researchers who can bring these huge breakthroughs in other fields and apply them to mental health. So more targeted therapies, therapies potentially with less side effects, and patients that don't have to guess, and clinicians don't have to guess what they should or should not be in on and for how long.
And this is a typical example of innovation, right? And how does your work show up in real people's lives, not just labs or data?
Yeah, so for us, we constantly interact with clinicians that are providing care as well as patients. And every day we hear of stories of patients that have struggled, and through our technology are able to have a much clearer, much more effective conversation with their care provider. And vice versa, we hear of clinicians that say, hey, I've never had this type of data that enables me to have effective and quick conversations that really better the patient's lives. And that for us is everything. That's our mission.
Great. So you're looking at precision medicine and application in mental health. And when did you first realize this work had a real world impact?
Yeah, I'll be honest, it was a little bit embarrassing for me because it was more of a personal take for me, where when you look at the people around you, as they age or as they have significant life changes, how that impacts their mental health. I quickly realized that there were huge gaps in care that was being provided and the data that was available. Everything was guesswork and everything was based on let's try this and check in a little bit later. And when you are not in a great state of health, that's really an unacceptable way to work through care. And so for me, looking at Headlamp and the way the data was collected very ethically with all the consent and then provided back to patients and caregivers, that for me was a real turning point.
Thank you. And according to the current statistics, right, there are reasons people seek AI support. And among those using AI for mental health or emotional support, the top self-reported concerns include anxiety, which is 79.8%, depression, 72.4%, and stress level of 70%. And often side, these are relationship issues, low self-esteem, and trauma. Now, going back to your platform, and you work on cancer and other medical conditions. What made you decide to focus your work on the brain and the mental health now?
It's a great question. So I've spent over 2.5 decades in those other fields and really bringing cutting edge technologies, making differences to clinicians, saving lives to patients, and really budging the needle there. But for me, it was a personal mission. I was exposed to the mental health side of medicine and immediately realized these guys are about 2 decades behind. Like I've been around long enough that if I think about where oncology was 2 decades, that's kind of where we are in
Mm.
neuroscience and mental health overall. And so for me to be able to translate things that worked, things that didn't work, and know the difference, could save time and really impact people's livelihoods and relationships with one another, and really help remove some of these handicaps that are really hampering clinicians from being able to apply great care.
And that's our focus as clinician to right, providing the best care for our patient. And why do you think now is the right time to focus on mental health?
Yeah, I actually am not a fan of that question because I think we should be focusing on all the time.
Mhm.
Typically, when I speak to patients or clinicians about specific cases, mental health is always a factor, whether you're an oncology patient, for instance, a cardiology patient, or other, or autoimmune, for instance. And so I think the brain itself, the organ of interest, which we're all studying and trying to understand with a lot better kind of fidelity, um, with the technologies that we have available to us, mainly AI, it enables us to really look through very large data sets that a single human brain is just not capable of doing. And to ask questions, iterate in a matter of seconds, and be able to make scientific determinations and discoveries, or be able to really elucidate what is going on with this patient right now, gives us that luxury, and the time is now to deploy that technology.
I definitely agree with you that this is very important and that we need to prioritize. So before there was so much stigma about it, now we're heading towards the future, which is very important to do precision medicine and application to it in psychiatry because we really need to mitigate those misdiagnoses and also the frustration of the patients waiting for their proper treatment plan and also for their proper diagnosis to be implemented under visit. And there's such a big tool that we can have now as clinician, which is very important. As part of that is your headlamp, which also we're implementing in our clinic, which can also help out catch those information as much as we can for our patients so there's no redundancy or replication or duplication of care. Now, what felt most challenging about making that transition?
Yeah, I think the most challenging is that it's, when you spent so much time like I have and that some of the teammates that I've assembled in cardiology, oncology, it's very easy to reach for tools that have worked in that field. To be able to say, hey, why don't we just image this? And the truth of the matter is, I can image a tumor in cancer, for instance, and physically measure it. And so if I have a patient on a therapy, I can watch that tumor shrink or disappear. I can also measure the effects of that therapy in blood, so I can measure it without taking a picture using a liquid biopsy. And those tools aren't available to us, or they don't work the same way, I should probably say is more accurate in mental health and neuroscience. They just don't. So I can't take a picture of depression or anxiety. I can get an idea of which parts of the brain are firing and why, but making the connection to what the patient is actually experiencing is very tough. And if we use those tools, it's like taking a Polaroid picture of a movie. And so you only get a very partial shot because we know that these conditions are time dependent and sometimes very episodic. And so this is where large longitudinal data or data that carries or follows the patient over time enables us to see what that movie is, the twists and turns, and be able to really inform the clinician, the patient, and also researchers how they should tailor the experience of the patient and really perform better care. So for us, the biggest challenge is don't be tempted by using tools that have worked in the past in other areas. Learn what works and what doesn't, but very quickly really look for new, or in our case, we had to build a tool to be able to capture that moving picture to make sense of what was happening at the individual level.
Thank you for that. And now is the time, and now is a very inflection point, right? The need has even been greater, right? For the first time, technology has caught up to the complexity of our problem. So we have better data that you provide, better computation tools, and more open conversation about mental health. So waiting longer would mean missing a rare opportunity to make a real progress. And that's the time we're in. We can help more patients. So there's so much sophisticated treatments for physical diseases that succeeded. So people around us, right, our colleagues, family, and even friends were quietly struggling with anxiety, depression, burnout, or cognitive decline. So the science that we're offering right now was advancing in one area, but the human experience was lagging in another. So that disconnect stayed also with me as clinician. And then accepting uncertainty, as you have pointed in cancer and other areas, we often have biomarkers, right? Imaging and clear endpoints. So mental health doesn't always offer that clarity. You have to be comfortable working in gray areas. It's very humbling and motivating as a clinician, as per se, and that's the most common challenging that we have. Now, Sir Erwin, why mental health has lagged behind?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think mental health, in my very, very humble opinion, has lagged behind for two main reasons. One is the lack of analytical tools or being able to measure things um, quantitative as opposed to qualitative. So an example of that would be, I think this color is blue, is very qualitative and quantitative. I can give you a number that corresponds to mixing several, mixtures of paint to give you the exact blue color every single time, right? And so we just haven't had that in the field. That's one. The other, I think, is a social aspect, which I think you alluded to, which is taboo or stigma.
Mm.
And so I think we're making a lot of headway there. I think that post-pandemic, more people are openly talking about it. And I think what has changed, at least from my perspective, is that people of all walks of life at different stages of life are openly talking about it. Whether you're a very, very stressed out student suffering from anxiety, to a very high functioning executive, very close to burnout, wink, wink, or somebody in the later stages of life that is suffering from cognitive decline or loneliness coupled with anxiety or depression, for instance. And so those two things, I think, for at least from our vantage point, allow us to do the work that we do. One is people have actually been collecting a lot of data for many, many decades. It's just been sitting in people's notebooks, hard drives, faxes, different systems, kind of fractured. And so we've been able to pull all that together very quickly. And then we realize there's actually data that hasn't been collected or isn't complete. And that's where we've built Lumos AI, which is our AI platform, to be able to not only ingest that data, but to reason it very quickly. So we don't have to wait another 20 years to, see what data was collected 20 years back. We can actually do this in real time. And so I think that's been incredible in terms of catching us up and keeping us updated in the field.
Great. I could not further agree with you that mental health hasn't lagged for just one reason. So we emphasize that it's a combination of science, funding, and at the same time, the stigma around it. So scientifically, our brain is very complex organ we know, and from a funding perspective, it's historically been under prioritized. And stigma has discouraged people from seeking help or advocating loudly enough for change. So there are factors like access and also cultural factors. And the lack of objective measurements has been a major barrier too. So if you can't reliably measure something, it's harder to diagnose, harder to study, and harder to treat. And that showed everything from drug development to clinical adoption. And I do believe this is finally starting to change, though, right? There are advances in data science, neurotechnology, and AI, such as Headlamp Health, giving us new ways to observe patterns that were previously invisible. Now, Sir Erwin, for my follow up question, why is it harder to measure mental health than something like blood pressure, or what makes mental health different from other medical conditions when it comes to diagnosis and treatment?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is the way biology has designed the brain. It has really protected it from everything exterior to it, if you think about it. It's one of the only organs that's completely encased in skeletal, so your skull, right? And then we have a thing called the blood-brain barrier, which essentially protects your brain from infections or foreign agents entering that space, because it is a confined space. And so by definition, it's very isolated from everything else. And so if I take a tube of blood, the big question is it really representative of what's going on in your brain? So that I think we've spoken about some of the challenges with biomarkers, and there are advancements that are happening there.
Mm,
Um, but I think it would be a bit of a shortcoming if we only focus on measuring one thing to be able to tell us what's going on with this very, very complex brain, which is what controls everything by definition. So that's one challenge. The other is that in mental health, we rely on the patient describing what they're experiencing and then clinicians observing that. And sometimes there's a gap or an overlap there. And so again, you're several degrees removed with what's going on mechanistically in the brain. And so it further compounds the translational situation that occurs between what's happening biologically and what is happening in everyday life. How does it manifest? And being able to tease that apart. And that's where data can really help you because you can actually assign certain things at a specific time to a particular condition and rule out others or prioritize their treatment. And so that's where I think we can tease apart what patients sometimes or sometimes don't vocalize or is observed, and what can we do to address the problem rather than just the symptoms, which is what's typically described.
That's definitely part of the assessment as clinicians that I could relate to, that mental health is harder to measure than something like blood pressure because we're often also measuring experiences, right? Thoughts, emotions, perceptions, rather than a single biological signal. So today, patient self-report plays a big role, which is important subjective data. So that subjectivity also carries some risks, right? Misdiagnosis, delayed treatment, and trial and error care. So it places a heavy burden on both patients and clinicians like me. So improving measurement doesn't remove the human element, it actually supports it. Thank you, Sir Erwin, for that. This is such a great conversation that everybody could resonate to as clinicians out there. Now, when people hear artificial intelligence or AI, it can sound very intimidating. In simple terms, how can AI actually help improve mental health care?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and having been a very early adopter of AI several years ago at previous companies, um, what I typically say is obviously with new technologies, there's a lot of hope, a lot of fever, a lot of um, probably unrealistic expectations on new technology. I can tell you many, many years ago, I worked on stem cells, and we thought that in a very short period of time, we would be able to regrow organs or grow organs on demand. And obviously, that has not happened. Um, and the scientists that were working in that particular field were very realistic, but I think a lot of people's imagination got a little carried away with the possibilities. And I think possibilities are very helpful sometimes to stretch the imagination and how we can really lean into new technologies. But at the same time, we have to remember that there are people on the other side of the conversation and care pathways. So, what I typically say about AI is that it is the leap between doing very complex, tedious, for instance, summation, subtraction, division, and multiplication, so arithmetic, and being able to put that in a spreadsheet and get all those numbers crunched instantly. So it's really been able to provide a time saving that is measurable. And so at Headlamp, we definitely use a lot of AI, but we don't use it as a chatbot to try and provide therapy or relationship advice, for instance. There are instances where, regrettably, that is how the technology is being used, and we're not big fans of deploying technology without really understanding the impact. So the way we use AI at Headlamp is to really take what would take 150 clinicians 3 years to do, for instance, for one patient, to be able to do that in 3 minutes. And so now it's scalable. Now I can deploy it, I can make it available to more patients or more clinicians. And so artificial intelligence, the way I like to describe it, not to dumb it down or to put down its impact, but it is a very, very crafty calculator.
Thank you for that. And definitely, there's so much administrative burden when you told me that we can do it the most efficient way and the most effective way. That's something that is a green flag for me because if there's burnout, a lot of clinicians will not be so productive and they may end up quitting their job. And that's why you guys are here like Headlamp help to help us to be an effective clinician. So this can make us make better decisions. It can also reduce administrative burden, and it also highlights insights that we may miss. And the biggest misconception is that AI replaced clinicians, but for me, it is best used in making clinician more effective and actually more human, especially that we're dealing with speech, behavior, sleep, or cognitive patterns over time. And this can also helps out that which patient may need extra support or needing extra support often earlier than the traditional methods. So I think AI can find patterns at scale, and an impact that is sustainable too. Now let's talk about your platform, right? At the same time, we're looking at treatment plans for mental health. Right now, doctors and researchers often feel disconnected. How can AI help bring everyone onto the same page? And how does shared data improve trust and collaboration?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. Um, it's very similar to what actually occurred in oncology, where I'll paint a picture for you because this was an actual real life example. If you have a patient in rural Montana that is requiring care and treatment, do they have the same knowledge, capacity, and clinician intuition than one of the top cancer centers, for instance, in MD Anderson or Stanford or the UC system, for instance, here in California? And the question in oncology used to be no. Like if you had a very rare type of cancer or a very aggressive cancer, for the best shot on goal for your survival, you had to go and get treatment and seek treatment at those centers. Now, that has changed quite a bit. And the way that that has been changed is by providing kind of a level playing field for all clinicians. Now, for very esoteric or exotic type treatments that are still in clinical trials, obviously you have to go where the trials are being conducted in oncology at least. But in mental health, we have the ability to provide that type of data and information, irregardless of where the physical location of that patient slash clinician are. And a lot of times their caregivers are not in the same state if they're doing telemedicine, for instance, which has become more and more popular, particularly post-COVID. And so the way our platform works is that not only does it connect clinician and patient in between visits, but we also know that clinicians are burdened with a lot of administrative work and that 30, 50, 60-minute visit with the patient, a lot of it is taken up by catching up to where the patient has been since the last visit, but also taking down things like notes or making remarks or comparing or getting reacquainted with medications that the patient might or might not be on. And so being able to do that um, through our platform, both on the clinician and the patient side, provides them immediate, accurate information, and then they can really get to the meat of the conversation, as opposed to how have you been since the last visit, which could take up 70 to 80% of that time allocated for that visit. So data is everything, but the data has to be shared to the right folks at the right time, and it has to be accurate.
And that's important. And AI can act as a shared language too, right? When the data flows responsibly and transparently, it builds trust and collaboration. So patients feel more seen when clinicians feel more supported and researchers get clear signals to work with. So this can absolutely help reduce clinician burnout by cutting through the noise and focusing attention where it matters most. And this is a very important tool that everybody that is tuning into this podcast can resonate. And please make sure to tune in where we can find Headlamp Health for support. Okay. Our next question for you is that how technology help better understand what a patient is going through, especially when symptoms aren't always visible for them.
Hmm, that's a great question. And so this is where, and I don't know if you'd noticed, but whenever somebody asks me about what Headlamp does, I don't use the word AI a lot because I
Mhm.
think it's like magic. Oh, with AI, it does this for
Mhm.
us. It doesn't do that. We actually have a lot of very, very experienced individuals that use AI as a tool in the background to make this happen.
Mhm.
But um, most of us are carrying around a cell phone. Most of us increasingly have some form of a wearable, whether it's a Fitbit or an Aura Ring or whatever your heart desires. And what we're able to do is actually take that information and cross-check it and marry it with previous signals or signals in other populations that have experienced the same type of symptoms, for instance, to be able to look for very complex patterns. These are patterns that a human brain, if I were able to print out or provide a screen large enough for the top analysts in this space to be able to find these patterns, they just wouldn't be able to do it. Um, and that really shows the complexity. You're trying to look for signals above noise that come from all areas of these data repositories, whether it's medications, um, clinicians' notes, for instance. And so that's not very intuitive and it's very, very, very labor intensive. And so what we want is we want the clinician and the patient to have those signals available to them almost in real time. And that's what we're able to do with our platform. And so when you look at our platform, it looks like a dashboard, and we've
Mm.
purposely made it look very easy to read, so that it doesn't take over your practice, or as a patient, you're not overburdened or being told what to do. All we're trying to do in the background is do all the clever, heavy lifting with all the intelligence layers, and then provide something that is actionable for the clinician to take advantage of, and to enable that conversation. So we look for signals that are non-obvious, that might be hidden under the layers. And we know that clinicians who have been practicing for over 20, 30 years build that over those decades. The ability to hear somebody's speech and inflections if they're in their tones and the way they answer questions and how they differ from previous visits. But to do that, you need to essentially build that over time with a patient. And for us to be able to assist in doing that much quicker for somebody who's only been practicing for 2, 3, 5 years, for instance, we think is very, very advantageous.
Yes, and it makes us clinicians to help the patients more, especially before reaching their crisis points. It's at the same time, we're putting the patient first at all times. How do we make sure, though, that technology supports human connection instead of replacing it? And this is a very good question that we can relate as clinicians to.
Yeah, so we're not in the business of replacing clinicians.
Mhm.
I think nobody that works at Headlamp would prefer to speak to a robot than a real clinician. Um, I think that human connectivity is everything, and it's so personal, because you're confining in that individual about some really tough things to talk about, and you're looking for that level of empathy, and connectivity that you might find in an AI as an avatar, and you might feel that that data is being shared in a confidential manner. But for us, we don't believe that the technology is there. And so our real remit is to really make precision a standard format in this space that's been obviously sorely needed. We don't believe that these technologies will fully supplant. They might assist and augment, but fundamentally, you still see, and I know you see this from your vantage point, still a huge vacuum of mental health professionals that are needed in the field. It's not going the other way, where we have too many or we actually don't have enough. And so we want to make sure that we're making superheroes out of these practitioners by providing this data available to them in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and if it's user friendly and the dashboard makes us have all the information that we needed before we see the patients, that really makes a difference because I think those information are important in order to have the correct treatment plan. And that's something that we are receiving in clarity and more in the most efficient way. Now, let's talk about your perspectives. If there's one thing you hope people take away about the future of mental health and technology, what would it be?
There are a lot of people working really hard to make it better. And I think it's going to take a village, not an individual. I think clinicians have been on the front lines for far too long, kind of holding the fort. And now that we have technology and researchers being able to connect those two things together, I really do think that in a short period of time here, we're going to see therapies that really can target patients, that make a real difference, side effects that we don't have to then manage with other medications, ideally, and timely response. Really an ecosystem that's tighter. I think if we think about our patients being race car drivers, and we've got clinicians that are in the pit teams, they're doing everything they can to keep that car doing those laps around the racetrack of life. But they're doing it in a very, very disadvantaged way. And so if we can bring higher analytics, better tools, some automations, then we can make winning teams and everybody can finish those races and get those best lap time records. So I'm super pumped about what the future has, and I really see this area being having a real turning point. And obviously Headlamp being one of those companies that can help really partner with folks across the spectrum. We partner with advocacy groups, with clinician groups. We partner with researchers. We share our data that we generate, not patient data, things that we see out there with other teams and other groups to, kind of get that rising tide that lifts all boats. So I'm actually very, very optimistic about the near future with these technological improvements.
That's great. What gives us hope also is that we're finally treating mental health with the seriousness it deserves, right? Probably 10 years from now, success would look like earlier interventions, more personalized care, and far less stigma. Everyday people shape that future by speaking openly, demanding better systems, and staying engaged. That's something we're heading at as the future of mental health. And the future of mental health doesn't belong to technology alone, it belongs to people who use technology thoughtfully. Oh, Sir Erwin, with everything that you're doing right now, with all the leadership and work you do, what are you most proud of, and what do you want people to remember most about you?
Oh my God, that is a very loaded question. I think I think in my trajectory, my career, I've really met some really remarkable people, and I had a real big realization, thankfully, very early in my career, and that was that everybody is a patient. It's just a matter of time, whether it's in cancer, in neurodegenerative, as we age, but particularly in mental health, it is not time dependent. And so, if I were to be able to implement and use my collective network, my ability to raise capital to tackle these very, very tough problems that have really plagued us, to make a real difference, I think that's worthwhile spending time on, and that's a life worth living. And so, I don't have children, and I hope I'm not oversharing, but I have many products that are like my children in various aspects of healthcare. And so that makes me very, very proud. And I can look back and say that really helped someone out, and, cracked a really hard problem that had been largely neglected because it's intimidating. Nobody wants to fail. But we all have to try something that really challenges us and can serve as an inspiration for others that come afterwards, to really tackle the additional harder problems.
Thank you. We're so proud of you because you're bringing theory into real impact. And I think it's you're putting people, especially patients, at the center of innovation. And your title may fade, but your impact lasts, and Headlamp Health is here to stay. Thank you so much for that, Sir Erwin. Now, I have a mindfulness deck cards here. So I have four categories. It says emotions, mindful, inquiry, and expression.
Let's go expression.
So, what is something that always makes you laugh?
I think animals always make me laugh. I
What is
think
your favorite animals?
I have two dogs. My wife and I have two dogs,
Nice. What are their
and
names?
their names is Sydney and Chrissy. They're
Okay.
whippets, so they're like small greyhounds. And they, any animal, whether it's I'm watching, birds carry on in a tree across from me in the office, or our pet dogs, or I have a pond with koi. They always make me laugh because I watch how they live their lives, and sometimes we worry about things that aren't really that important, and so they really help ground me and have a real connection with. They're my four-legged therapists. That's what I call them.
I agree with you, and that's what we call animal assisted therapy or AAT. And according to the current research, right, 74% of pet owners believe their mental health improved after getting a pet. And in 2025 survey of US dog and cat owners, 95% reported daily mental health improvements, thanking their pet, and their mental health rating jumped from 32% before they have pets to 71% after getting pets. So that's a great statistics that we're looking at. And human animal interaction has been shown to reduce stress, anxiety. A lot of my patients reported low blood pressure, heart rate, and cortisol and the stress hormone, which is very important in terms of improving their mood, social connection, and for people with depressive disorders based on inpatient settings. So this is some meta-analysis studies that they have found a moderate statistically significant reductions in depression in older adults participating in animal therapy sessions program. Okay. Especially petting and interacting with animals releases relaxation hormones such as oxytocin, serotonin, and prolactin, which can elevate mood and and decrease stress. My next category is mindfulness. As
Mhm.
I have said, mindfulness. See here. Describe a time when you forgave someone and how did it make you feel?
Mm, what a terrific question.
Yes.
What a terrific question. I think this is an un undervalued question that more people should ask themselves. So again, not to overshare, but I fundamentally, at this point at my age, I fundamentally agree that there are no evil people. That's my current thesis in life, which means that people are making decisions or taking action based on what they believe to be true or other motives. And sometimes that overlaps or clashes, more importantly, with what we would like or what we expect or what we would see. And therein lies friction or ill doing. And so for me, there's been several fairly big markers in life actually where I felt that what had happened to me was unfair or unjust, or premeditated, or I didn't really understand where that person's motivation had come from. And uh, in several instances, it was relatively hard, and it took many years to look back and say, I don't understand it fully because I'm not in their head, but it's easier and better for me to forgive them and move on with my life. I don't need to provide free rent in my mind and
Mhm.
emotions for them. And I think people sometimes use um, various faith or other based ways of being able to do that, which I think is very helpful. In my mind, it's very mechanical, just simply because of my scientific and technical background, that life is short, relatively short, and I'm more interested in what's happening in the future rather than lamenting what occurred in the past. And I have run into folks that potentially I've had to forgive, and it's very therapeutic. It's very enlightening. For me personally, it felt like many, many, many kilograms or pounds had been lifted when kind of finding that catharsis or reconciliation. So, whether it's family members, loved ones, co-workers, um, somebody that cut you off in traffic, there are many opportunities to exercise that level of forgiveness. And I'm not claiming it's easy, but there has been some key moments that have really been very helpful for me personally.
Thank you for sharing that. And they said forgiveness is the key, right? For us and as human nature. And you're correct. If they don't pay any value to our life, then why we allow people to stay in our mental health and they don't pay any rent. They don't pay our bills, right? Thank you for that. And now we'll talk about inquiry. Okay, inquiry. And this is very important. What is something that you are proud of? And I think I have a little bit of idea for your answer
Something
here.
that I'm proud of.
Yeah,
Hmm.
something that you are proud of.
Wow. You, something that I'm proud. I'm proud of a lot of things that you could point at, like career-wise, etc. Putting the first stem cells into humans, or I can go down the chart, unlocking a whole layer of biology, raising large amounts of capital for a company to really make breakthroughs in science. All of that you could point to. But I think just being a good person to others. I know that's kind of a bit of a cop out, but I think it's underrated. And I think if I can, pick up the phone or send a text message to somebody I worked with 20, 25 years ago and catch up and have a laugh and kind of share where life has taken us, whether it's same trajectory or different. I really cherish the ability to do that. I can't think of me existing and not being able to interact. We just attended the largest healthcare conference here in San Francisco, the JP Morgan Healthcare
Mm.
Conference, and crossing the street, I could bump into two or three people and that I worked with 17, 18, 20 years ago and catch up in 3 minutes flat, and that brings me a lot of joy. And I think it's very easy to burn bridges or not really enjoy the time you have with other humans, no matter what you're working on. It doesn't have to be science or healthcare. But being able to build those connections and maintain them or refresh them on an instant, for me, that's a big achievement.
And the last piece is emotion. Okay, letter E. And this is where a question: what is something that sometimes makes you feel scared?
Mm.
Do you have any phobia or fear or anything that makes you scared?
So I've had some phobias I've overcome over the years. I grew up very scared of heights, actually.
Hmm.
Terrified. If I had to go up a staircase, I would always walk on the inside edge of a staircase. So it was just very, very traumatic. Um, and in my late teens, I tried indoor rock climbing. Don't ask me why. And uh, I did that for many, many years, and it helped me get over that phobia. I think, like a lot of people, you can kind of get that inhale of a little bit of being scared of the uncertainty of things. And I think the times we live in, particularly post-COVID, it can provide that level of scariness. And I think over the years, maybe it's a sign of maturation or going through it several times. Um, I've learned a little bit to take that being scared of uncertainty to excitement of what could happen, that kind of scary excitement. And so then that liberates part of my emotions and brain to think about the possibilities of things instead of the uncertainty of things. And I think you need a little bit of that when you're an entrepreneur or working on very tough problems where a lot of the solutions on the first go, second, third, fourth don't actually work. You have to continue to iterate before it makes it even close to a patient or an end user. So I would probably say things that sometimes still scare me is uncertainty. We're living in times that geopolitically are just, you know, They were not on my bingo card for the next 10 years. And so, but I think everybody has their own phobias. And for me, I would say that would be it. But I don't have phobias of spiders or anything like that.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Erwin. That is very good advice for our listeners, right? Self-help strategies are very important. I think gradual exposure, avoidance keeps fear alive, so exposure retrains the brain. So if you are fearful about certain objects, the key is to don't rush, but don't escape too early either. So kind of like fear of heights, you can look at photos of balconies or watch videos taken from heights. Or we can stand near a window on a higher floor or step onto a low balcony. So uh, looking at anxiety dropping by 50% if you do the systematic desensitization set. Or breathing techniques is also important and being grounded, right? So I tell my patients, what can you see at this moment? And name five things that you can see or three things that you can hear. At least this will make them grounded. So it keeps their brain from spiraling upward into panic mode or those catastrophic thoughts that they have. Like if they tell you, I will fall, I will lose control, I will faint. So you ask them, how many times has this actually occurred, right? What evidence do I have that I'm unsafe right now? And what would I tell a friend in this situation? So remember, fear could be exaggerated risk, and reality brings it back into proportion, and that's very important. Another practical tips is regular exercise because they can reduce baseline anxiety. Limit caffeine before you height exposure. Sleep well. Fatigue amplifies fear response, and also practice mindfulness or meditation 5 to 10 minutes per day. So, focusing on the present time, not overthinking about the past or the future. And if you really need some help, professional interventions, cognitive behavioral therapy can be discussed with your therapist, and medication, short-term support, such as beta blockers, could be also effective. And of course, avoidance is not always the answer. So avoiding heights entirely reinforces further fear. And always remember, rely only on reassurance, like telling yourself, I'm fine, is also not a good strategy. And don't judge yourself. Fear is not a weakness. And always force yourself into extreme exposure. Too fast is also a pitfall that we shouldn't do when we have phobia. So having acrophobia is manageable and we can do this together. Thank you, sir. And this is such a great hour session. Oh my god, I learned so much. And so, Sir Erwin, with everything that you're doing, and a lot of my listeners are nurse practitioners and also working in the healthcare. And where can they follow you in your social platforms and how can they connect with you?
Great question. So I would encourage everybody to visit www.headlamp.com. You'll see a variety of information available there. We're still the size of a company, and we hope to continue this, that if you email us or you call us, there'll be an actual human on the other side. It won't be an AI. And so you can have direct conversations with some of our technical folks and even get a hold of me. You can also stay up to date on LinkedIn on professional advancements, as well as we're active on the usual social media platforms. But LinkedIn is usually where we post updates, and happy to connect with you, discuss how we can collaborate and bring mental health with a higher degree of precision to patients and clinicians as well as researchers. So thank you so much for your time. I really, really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you, Sir Erwin. And you've been to Philippines too, right? Do a shout out. Like I think you know some Tagalog words too.
Absolutely. So I have several good friends and business partners, and the previous company I built had a very large presence in Manila. So I have to watch my lechon intake every time I visit. but really love the Pinoy culture, and just really, really, really enjoy my time there with people and amazing food. But yes, thank you so much for your time, and anything that we can do to support you and your important work, we're always here to help.
Thank you, Sir Erwin, and shout out to Nikita. She's been amazing and helping our office, back end office, to make it work. And also, thank you for what you do. This is something that is innovation in the future of mental health, and precision psychiatry is here to stay. Here you go again, Sir Erwin Estigarribia, one of my most requested speaker here. I really, really adore you and the Headlamp Health, and for the innovations that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Mindful Moments with Pedro Morante. Be sure to follow the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. If you find value in our time together, leave a quick review. It helps more people discover the space we're creating. For updates and more reflections, follow us on social media. Until next time, take care.